The first whispers came like drifting smoke, fragile and fleeting, yet impossible to ignore. Soldiers on remote outposts spoke of a ship that appeared out of nowhere, struck with inhuman precision and vanished before scanners could react. They called it Oblivion's wrath, as if the void itself had birthed a weapon for vengeance. Captain Aris Vale, a decorated officer of the Sovereign Union, dismissed these tales as superstition. Humanity, he believed, had been erased long ago. The Union's history books proudly described Operation Ashfall, the campaign that burned Terra Prime into silence. They called it a necessary cleansing, a final act of mercy to prevent a violent species from endangering the galaxy. Aris had memorized those lectures as a young cadet. The instructors spoke with cold logic, presenting charts and casualty numbers like proof of righteousness. They never spoke of faces, of children, of culture erased. It was always statistics, clean, bloodless numbers. In those days he believed it all, but years of service had taught him to recognize lies, the way truth was buried beneath speeches about order and stability. He had seen records sealed without reason, witnesses vanish after questioning orders, entire colonies renamed and their histories rewritten. The Union called it preservation of harmony. Aris began to wonder if it was really just fear, fear of memory, fear of the past returning to judge them. Among the soldiers, the whispers grew bolder. Some claimed that fragments of Terran technology had resurfaced on forgotten worlds, pieces of a lost age when humanity reached far beyond its home star. Others spoke of a man, Kalen Drax, who had watched his world burn and his family perish beneath the Union's firestorms. They said he vanished into the dark, scavenged forbidden knowledge, and forged a warship unlike any ever seen. To most, these stories were comfort, hope that even the smallest, weakest species could strike back against tyranny. But to the Sovereign Union, even a rumor was dangerous. The Union had always known that power came not only from weapons but from controlling belief. History was written by those who survived, and the dead had no voice. One night, while stationed on the warship Vanguard, Aris overheard young officers talking quietly. A technician swore that moments before a fleet disappeared at the Lyra outpost, he had heard something strange on the comms, an old Terran song, raw and defiant, as though the dead themselves had returned to speak. Some laughed, but Aris felt a chill run through him. He remembered distantly that song from forbidden recordings, music of rebellion, of people who would rather die free than live as slaves. Lying awake that night, Aris found himself staring at the starfield beyond his cabin window. The constellations glimmered like cold, watchful eyes. For the first time, he asked himself a question he had long buried. What if Terra Prime was never truly gone? What if the Union's greatest sin could not be erased? Empires rise by silencing the past, by burying truth beneath monuments of power. But the past is patient. It lingers like embers beneath ash, waiting for a single breath to awaken the fire again. And far away, in a place no Union map dared to mark, something had already begun to burn. But whispers alone were not enough to shake the Union, until entire fleets began to vanish. The first disappearance seemed, at first, like a simple malfunction. The Sovereign Union received a garbled distress signal from Lyra Outpost, a small colony world surrounded by mineral-rich asteroid fields. It was supposed to be an uneventful patrol, 20 ships in total, scouts, corvettes, and a handful of heavy cruisers. Their mission was to sweep the sector for rebels, pirates, or anyone foolish enough to defy Union law. The fleet never returned. There were no wrecks, no emergency beacons, not even a single shard of debris floating in the void. The Union's command council declared it an anomaly. Some blamed gravitational rifts, others said it was a black hole collapse. The official report spoke with the same detached tone Aris had grown to despise, pages of technical jargon to avoid a single frightening truth. Something had destroyed the fleet, and no one knew how. Among the lower ranks, fear spread quickly. Soldiers spoke in hushed voices of a black warship that struck like a phantom. They said it could move faster than sensors could track, that its weapons tore through shields as if they were made of paper. The rumors grew wilder each day. Some claimed it left messages carved into hull fragments. Others whispered of strange signals just before the fleets vanished. One technician swore he had heard an ancient Terran broadcast seconds before the fleet at Lyra Outpost went silent. It was music, the man insisted. Old human music, loud, defiant. His superiors dismissed him as delusional, and within a week he was transferred to a remote mining colony. No one saw him again. Aris Vale sat in the Vanguard's command chamber when the news spread. Officers tried to laugh it off, their forced smiles betraying their unease. The official statement arrived hours later. Fleet Alpha Lyra lost to unknown spatial anomaly. No further action required. Aris read it 3 times, each word colder than the last. No further action required. As if 20 ships, hundreds of lives, and entire families waiting for them had been erased with a single careless phrase. Later in the mess hall, he overheard the younger crew whispering. "What if it's them?" One asked. "Who?" "The humans. What if they are not gone?" Aris didn't join the conversation, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. For years, he had accepted the Union's version of history. The notion that Terra Prime's destruction was a necessary act for the galaxy's stability. Yet now, with each unexplained disappearance, that belief crumbled. Empires thrive on the illusion of control, on the belief that power is unshakable. But fear spreads faster than any order. Fear does not obey. And somewhere in the dark, Kalen Drax and the Oblivion's wrath struck again. No witnesses. No survivors, only silence deeper than the void. The Sovereign Union tried to hide the truth, but every vanished fleet became another spark. The soldiers began to wonder if humanity was truly gone, who was killing them. Aris lay awake that night, the words of an old academy instructor echoing in his mind. History is written by those who remain. The dead cannot speak. But what if the dead had found a voice? And what if that voice had finally decided to be heard? Those fears became reality when Aris Vale faced the Black Warship himself. The Narath Belt was a graveyard of shattered moons and drifting rock, a place where broken pieces of forgotten worlds circled endlessly in silence. It was a dangerous region, with unpredictable gravity wells and constant debris storms. Yet for the Vanguard and its escort fleet, it was routine. Captain Aris Vale stood on the bridge, overseeing the convoy. 3 freighters filled with weapons and supplies for the Union's frontier outposts, escorted by a science vessel gathering mineral data. The mission was dull, predictable, until the alarms began to scream. "Unidentified object incoming," shouted a young officer, his voice cracking. "No IFF code, speed impossible." Aris leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Define impossible." "It just appeared on sensors," another crew member stammered. 3 sectors away, No, it's here." The ship trembled as something massive flickered into view outside the viewport. A shadow, jagged and angular, gliding effortlessly among the tumbling rocks. It looked wrong. Its shape was unnatural, as if pieces of fallen ships had been welded together into a single monstrous form. The hull bore scars of countless battles, blackened and scorched yet unbroken. No lights, no insignia, only silence. And then it opened fire. A beam of pale blue light erupted from the vessel, slicing through one of the escort fighters. The fighter split apart in perfect halves, the pieces drifting soundlessly into the void. The crew gasped. There had been no warning, no communication, no demand for surrender. "Evasive maneuvers, fire at will," Aris shouted. The Vanguard unleashed everything it had: plasma lances, rail bursts, missile volleys. But every shot either missed or glanced harmlessly off the black ship's hull. It was as if the thing knew where every strike would land before they fired. Another Union cruiser tried to flank the vessel, diving in from the left. For a second, it looked like the maneuver might work. Then, in an instant, the black ship vanished. Where did it go? Someone shouted, panic rising. The sensors flickered. Static filled the comms. Then the ship was suddenly inside their formation, as if it had stepped through space itself. It's teleporting," the sensor officer whispered, his face pale. Aris felt his chest tighten. The Sovereign Union had no technology like this. No species they had conquered possessed it. Whatever this ship was, it was beyond anything they understood. It fired again, but not wildly. Every shot was deliberate, surgical. Engines, reactors, pilots, pods, each strike disabling, not just destroying. It wasn't fighting a battle. It was dismantling them. Through the viewport, Aris saw their sister ship, Solaris Blade, erupt in a chain of fire as its reactor detonated. The explosion illuminated the black vessel just long enough for Aris to see it clearly. Burned into its hull was a crude emblem, a skull behind the outline of Terra Prime's orbit. Aris froze. "It's real." The crew scrambled, shouting over one another as the Vanguard took another direct hit. Sparks erupted from panels, lights flickered, and the floor shook violently. Main power failing. A voice cried. Decks 12 through 14 vented. Aris gripped the edge of his command chair, forcing himself to stay calm. Full retreat, all ships scatter. But deep down, he knew retreat was useless. The black ship didn't chase. It didn't need to. It moved with the cold, measured confidence of a predator that had already won. And as the Vanguard struggled to flee, a voice cut through the comms, not through their system, but directly, as if speaking into their minds. A man's voice. Human. Rough. Steady and utterly calm. "You burned our world. You buried our children. You called us weak, broken, primitive. You should have finished the job." The transmission ended, and the Oblivion's wrath vanished back into the void, leaving only silence and the drifting wreckage of those who had tried to stop it. And then, for the first time, the Phantom spoke. Silence lingered long after the black ship vanished. The Vanguard drifted through the wreckage of its sister vessels, its hull scorched and bleeding air into the void. Emergency lights flickered across the bridge, casting ghostly red glows on the shaken faces of the crew. Captain Aris Vale stood frozen, his hands gripping the edge of his command chair so tightly his knuckles had turned white. His mind replayed the voice he had just heard, a man's voice, human, steady yet heavy with exhaustion. "You burned our world. You buried our children. You called us weak, broken, primitive. You should have finished the job." It hadn't been a threat. It hadn't even been angry. That was what unsettled Aris the most. The voice carried no rage, no triumph, only the quiet certainty of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Hours later, as damage crews worked frantically to stabilize the ship, Aris sat alone in his quarters, staring at the stars beyond his viewport. For the first time in years, he felt a gnawing unease about everything he had been taught. The Sovereign Union had always portrayed humanity as a barbaric, unstable species, a danger to themselves and others. The destruction of Terra Prime, they said, was a mercy for the galaxy. Aris had believed it because believing was easier than asking questions. But what if everything he knew was a lie? What if the Union had not eliminated a threat but committed an atrocity, one so great that it could never be spoken of? The next day, Union High Command summoned him to a debriefing. The room was cold, its walls polished like obsidian. 3 officials, their faces hidden behind metallic masks, questioned him endlessly. Describe the ship. Describe its weapons. Did it communicate? Aris hesitated at the last question. Yes, he said finally. One of the officials leaned forward. What did it say? Aris repeated the words exactly. The room fell silent. For a moment he thought he saw a flicker of unease cross their otherwise expressionless masks. Then without a word they ended the debriefing. He was dismissed. That night, alone again, Aris replayed the memory of the voice in his head. It sounded human, terrifyingly human. There had been no demand for surrender, no speech about revenge or justice, just a single statement. You should have finished the job. Aris understood the meaning all too well. This was not simply an attack. It was a message, a reminder that the dead were not silent, that the forgotten would not remain buried. He thought about the stories he had heard in whispers. Kalen Drax, a man who had lost his family during the burning of Terra Prime, a man who vanished into the shadows and returned with a ship forged from grief and forbidden technology. Could one man really become the galaxy's most feared enemy? The Union taught that individuals were powerless, that only order and control could shape history. But Aris began to see the truth. History is not written by order. It is written by those who refuse to forget. For the first time in his career, Aris Vale wondered if he was serving the wrong side. He stared out the viewport at the endless dark, where Oblivion's wrath had disappeared. And for the first time, he felt fear, not of death but of truth. That doubt only deepened when Aris met those the Union had failed to erase. The Vanguard limped back to port under heavy escort, a wounded beast pretending to still be proud. The Sovereign Union called the incident at Narath Belt an unexpected rebel ambush. There would be no mention of Oblivion's wrath in the official reports. The Union had always been skilled at burying the truth, but Aris Vale could not bury what he had seen or heard. The calm, human voice echoed in his thoughts like a wound that refused to close. Weeks later, while stationed on Kelnar Station, Aris encountered a woman who would change everything. She appeared as if from nowhere in a dimly lit corridor, her short hair streaked with silver, a long scar running down her cheek. She moved with the confidence of someone who had lived through more battles than she could count. "You were there," she said quietly, "at Narath Belt." Aris stiffened. "Who are you?" She glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "My name is Mara Urin. I'm one of the last who still remembers Terra Prime, not the Union's version of it, but the truth." Aris studied her carefully. "You're human." Mara gave a faint smile. "I'm what the Union failed to erase." She led him through a maze of maintenance tunnels, past sealed doors and old storage chambers until they reached a forgotten hangar. Inside were about 20 people, thin, dirty, dressed in scraps of fabric and salvaged armor. Their faces bore the same haunted look, the same hard resilience. "These are the children of Terra Prime," Mara said. "Some were born in the ashes, others were taken as slaves and escaped. We are what remains of a people the Union swore was gone." Aris felt his chest tighten. For years he had believed the Union story, that humanity had been dangerous, that their destruction was necessary. But standing here, surrounded by survivors, that belief felt hollow, obscene. Mara continued, her voice steady. "Kalen Drax was once one of us, a father, a husband. He watched his home burn, his family die, and the galaxy turn its back. The Union calls him a monster, we call him Memory." "Memory?" Aris asked. Mara stepped closer, her eyes fierce. "Empires fear memory more than weapons. Weapons kill soldiers. Memory kills power. Kalen doesn't just fight the Union. He reminds them of what they did, of every child buried under glass, every city burned to silence." Aris swallowed hard. "But what he's doing, the fleets he destroys, how many innocent lives are lost?" Mara's expression darkened. "And how many innocents did the Union erase without blinking? Do you think Kalen enjoys this war? He does not fight for revenge. He fights so no empire will ever forget Terra Prime again." Aris left the hangar shaken. He had come face to face with living proof that the Union had lied for decades. The people he saw were not savage rebels. They were refugees, survivors of a genocide his government had buried beneath propaganda. That night he could not sleep. For the first time he asked himself a question he had never dared before. If the Union had truly been just, why did it need to erase history? Outside his viewport, the stars glimmered cold and distant. Somewhere among them, Kalen Drax and Oblivion's wrath prowled the dark, and Aris Vale realized that perhaps the man the Union called a monster might be the only one still holding onto his humanity. But the Union was not blind. They decided to turn Aris into the weapon that would end Kalen once and for all. The summons arrived without ceremony, an encrypted order bearing the seal of the Sovereign High Council. Captain Aris Vale was to report immediately to Hellion Command Citadel, the shining heart of the Union's military might. The Citadel was a monument to control, towering spires of black alloy, vast halls lined with banners proclaiming loyalty and unity. Every detail screamed power, order, permanence. But to Aris, it all felt hollow, like an empire terrified of its own shadow. He was escorted into a cold chamber, a circular room lit by a pale white glow. 5 counselors sat behind a curved obsidian table, their faces hidden behind mirrored masks. The air smelled of sterile metal and ozone. Captain Vale, the central figure, spoke, voice modulated and emotionless. "You have seen the enemy. You have heard his words. You understand the threat he poses." Aris kept his posture stiff. "I understand he has destroyed multiple fleets, yes, but nothing," another counselor interrupted sharply. "Kalen Drax and his Oblivion's wrath have become more than a nuisance. He is a symbol. Symbols breed rebellion. Rebellion breeds collapse." The first counselor gestured to a sealed case on the table. "We are giving you the means to end this. Permanently." The case hissed open, revealing a small black device, humming faintly as if alive. "This is the Singularity Shard," the counselor explained. "A weapon designed for one purpose, to annihilate Kalen Drax and his ship. When triggered, it collapses all matter in a 500-meter radius into a single point. There will be no wreckage, no trace, no martyr." Aris stared at the device, its cold glow reflecting in his eyes. And if I refuse? The chamber fell silent. Then a third counselor leaned forward. You will not refuse. You are an officer of the Sovereign Union. Your loyalty is not optional. That night, Aris sat alone in his quarters at the Citadel, the sealed case before him. He reached out but did not touch it, as if afraid the thing might burn him. He thought of Mara Urin, of the haunted faces of the survivors she had shown him. He thought of the calm, tired voice of Kalen Drax, a man who had lost everything yet still fought, not for revenge, but for memory. And then Aris thought of himself. All his life he had followed orders. He had believed in the Union because it was easier than questioning it. But as the years passed, the cracks had grown larger, sealed records, erased histories, nameless bodies buried beneath necessary losses. He realized with a sinking feeling that the Union had never seen him as a man. He was a tool, a weapon to be aimed and discarded once used. Hours later, his superior officer, Lieutenant Vera, found him staring at the case. You should feel honored, Vera said, voice cold. They chose you to finish this war. Aris didn't look up. What happens after I finish it? Vera's lips curled into a thin smile. You'll be celebrated, then replaced. That is how order survives. Aris said nothing, but deep inside something shifted, a quiet rebellion taking root. He understood now. The Union didn't fear Kalen Drax because of his ship or his weapons. They feared him because he remembered. Because memory, once unleashed, could not be destroyed by any singularity shard. Aris closed the case, the faint hum of the weapon echoing like a heartbeat. And for the first time in his life, he wondered whether pulling the trigger would make him more a monster than the man he was ordered to kill. His final test came when Kalen himself summoned him for a meeting in the dark. The message came 2 nights after Aris left Hellion Citadel. No encryption seal, no signature, just a set of coordinates pulsing on his private console like a heartbeat. He recognized the code. Kalen Drax was calling him. The rendezvous point was an abandoned relay station orbiting a dead moon. The station's lights were long extinguished, its hull pitted with centuries of meteor strikes. It floated like a tomb in the void. Aris arrived alone, piloting a small shuttle. The Singularity Shard rested in a secure compartment at his side, its faint hum filling the silence. As his shuttle docked, the airlock opened with a hiss. No guards waited for him, no weapons, just a single narrow corridor dimly lit by flickering panels. At the end of it stood Kalen Drax. He was taller than Aris remembered, his frame wiry but strong, his face worn by exhaustion and years of grief. He wore no armor, only a long dark coat that drifted slightly in the station's failing gravity. His eyes, however, were sharper than any blade. You came, Kalen said quietly. His voice was the same, steady, calm, unshaken. Aris stepped forward. You asked. They stood facing each other, 2 men separated by a lifetime of war and lies. Kalen gestured toward an empty chamber. No soldiers, no weapons, just words. Inside, the walls were lined with old flags, tattered remnants of worlds long destroyed. Aris saw one scorched banner bearing the emblem of Terra Prime. Another was marked with the sigil of a lost colony he remembered helping to pacify years ago. Kalen followed his gaze. These aren't trophies, they are reminders. Every empire builds monuments to victory. I build memories of what they've buried. Aris clenched his jaw. You've killed thousands. How many more need to die for your memory? Kalen tilted his head, his expression unreadable. How many died in silence because you obeyed? The question struck harder than any weapon. Aris hesitated. You call this justice, but is it really, or is it vengeance? Kalen stepped closer, his eyes locked on Aris. Justice would be impossible. The Sovereign Union erased entire civilizations. My wife, my daughter, my world, there is no justice for that. Then why? Aris pressed. Because forgetting is worse than dying, Kalen said softly. Empires kill not just with weapons, but with silence. They burn cities, then rewrite history so no one remembers who lived there. I fight so the galaxy can no longer pretend Terra Prime never existed. Aris reached slowly into his coat and placed the singularity shard on the table between them. Its dark surface glimmered faintly in the dim light. Kalen glanced at it but did not move. You could end this right now, Kalen said. One press, 1 second, I die, my ship dies, and my memory dies with me. Aris stared at the device, his hand trembling slightly. Why aren't you stopping me? Because this choice isn't about me, Kalen replied. It's about you. You've seen the truth. You've heard the lies. What kind of man do you want to be when this ends? The chamber fell silent. Aris felt the weight of every order he had obeyed, every colony he had helped subjugate, every life he had told himself was necessary loss. Kalen stepped back, letting the moment hang. Empires win when good men do nothing, he said quietly. But they fall when even one man remembers what they tried to forget. Aris closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he was not thinking like a soldier. He was thinking like a man. And he realized that pulling the trigger would not make him loyal. It would make him empty. The singularity shard hummed softly on the table, waiting. Aris opened his eyes and whispered, I won't be their weapon anymore. And Kalen Drax, for the first time that night, allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. Aris made his choice, and it was not the one the Union had expected. The hum of the singularity shard was the only sound in the chamber. It pulsed softly, as if alive, as if waiting for Aris Vale to choose what kind of man he would be. His hand hovered above it for a long moment. Then, with a sudden surge of resolve, Aris grabbed the device, dropped it to the ground, and crushed it beneath his boot. The shard cracked with a hiss of escaping energy, sparks scattering like fireflies before fading into silence. Kalen Drax watched without expression, only nodding slightly as the last faint glow of the weapon died. Good, Kalen said quietly. Now you're free, free. Aris asked bitterly. I've just betrayed everything I've ever served. They'll call me a traitor. They'll erase me from their records like they erased your people. Kalen stepped closer, his voice steady. Then they'll fear you more than ever. Because nothing terrifies an empire more than a soldier who remembers why he fought. Kalen led Aris through a narrow corridor deeper into the station. They entered a large chamber lined with data cores, their surfaces etched with glowing patterns like veins of light. This, Kalen said, gesturing to the pulsating archives, is every truth they buried. The burning of Terra Prime, the slaughter of dissenting colonies, the purges disguised as peacekeeping missions. Every erased name, every silenced voice, it's all here. Aris stared at the glowing cores, feeling the weight of the countless lives reduced to data. And you plan to release it. Kalen's eyes met his. Not just release it. We'll make it so every terminal, every comm link, every implant in the Sovereign Union will see it. Once the truth is out, they can't silence it again. Aris hesitated. The Union will crush you before you can transmit it. Kalen's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. They can kill me. They can kill my ship, but they can't kill the truth once it's free. For hours, Kalen showed Aris the archives. There were recordings of high-ranking officials giving execution orders. footage of extermination campaigns masked as relocations, documents detailing how history had been rewritten to justify every atrocity. One file made Aris's stomach twist, a list of approved erasures, names of officers deemed expendable once their loyalty was no longer useful. His own name was on that list. "They never saw you as anything more than a tool," Kalen said softly. Aris clenched his fists. "I know." Kalen placed a small chip in Aris's hand. "This is the key to the broadcast. Once we reach Hellion Bastion, we'll send the signal. Every colony, every ship, every world under the Union will see the truth they've tried to hide." Aris stared at the chip, feeling its weight despite its size. "And then what?" he asked. Kalen turned toward the viewport, where the vast shadow of Oblivion's wrath loomed like a silent predator. "Then the galaxy will remember, and empires built on lies cannot survive memory." As they boarded the black warship, Aris felt the final strands of his old life fall away. He was no longer Captain Aris Vale of the Sovereign Union. He was simply a man who had chosen not to be complicit anymore. And as the Oblivion's wrath drifted into the void, engines silent and waiting, Aris knew that the fight ahead would not just be for survival. It would be for the truth, for Terra Prime, for every name erased, for memory itself. But to deliver that truth, they would have to strike at the Empire's very heart. The fleet that assembled near the edges of Union-controlled space was nothing like the grand armadas Aris Vale had once commanded. There were no gleaming warships or proud banners, only a patchwork of vessels, scavenged from forgotten shipyards, stolen from outposts, or cobbled together from spare parts and desperation. Some ships bore scars from countless battles. Others barely held together, patched with welded plates and makeshift weapons. Yet every crew that stood aboard them carried the same unyielding fire in their eyes. They were deserters, exiles, rebels, and survivors. People who had been cast aside by the Sovereign Union, who had lost everything but their will to resist. At the center of them all loomed the black silhouette of Oblivion's wrath, silent and still, a shadow waiting to strike. Kalen Drax stood before the gathered captains inside the warship's briefing hall. His voice was quiet, but it carried with the weight of finality. "We are not here to win. We are here to end the lie. Hellion Bastion is their heart. Every order, every purge, every erasure, they all come from there. Once the truth is released, they will never be able to bury it again." Aris stood beside him, the data chip in his hand, the key to unlocking the Union's darkest secrets. He looked across the ragged assembly of rebels and deserters. None of them were ideal soldiers. Many were frightened, but every single one of them had chosen to be here. There was no going back. The fleet surged forward in a single defiant formation. No stealth, no flanking maneuvers. Just a straight path toward Hellion Bastion, the massive star fortress that hung like a black crown above a blazing white dwarf star. Defensive rings encircled the bastion, 3 layers of warships, automated gun platforms, and minefields. Beyond them waited the Union's most powerful dreadnoughts, over 200 ships strong. The Union saw them coming. That was the point. This was not a battle to hide in. This was a battle to be witnessed. The first engagement erupted before they reached the outer ring. Union interceptors swarmed in tight formations, sleek and efficient. The rebel fleet responded with chaotic ferocity, freighters converted into ramming ships, frigates hurling salvos far beyond safety limits. One freighter, Dawn's Vow, ignited its core and plowed straight into a Union destroyer, both ships erupting in a blinding explosion that cleared a path through the enemy line. Another vessel, Vesper's Howl, absorbed hit after hit, its hull breaking apart piece by piece, yet it kept moving forward, venting atmosphere and fire until it finally slammed into a cruiser, tearing both apart. Every ship lost carved a hole through the Union's perfect formation. Amid the chaos, Oblivion's wrath moved like a phantom, weaving through enemy fire with impossible precision. Its weapons did not spray blindly, it struck surgically, targeting command bridges, reactor cores, and life support systems with merciless accuracy. Kalen's voice came over the private channel to Aris. "When we reach the core, you will take the signal. You will broadcast it, no matter what happens to me." Aris's grip tightened on the data chip. "You think you won't make it?" Kalen's silence was answer enough. The fleet breached the first defensive ring. Then the second. Every moment was chaos, explosions, screams, alarms. Ships tore through one another like falling giants. Debris spun endlessly through the void, silent witnesses to a battle where survival was never the goal. By the time they reached the third ring, half the rebel fleet was gone. The Union dreadnoughts closed in, overwhelming the survivors with relentless firepower. But Oblivion's wrath did not slow. Kalen's ship plunged ahead, engines flaring like the heart of a dying star. "Aris," Kalen said over the comm, "it's time." And then the black warship dove straight into the final defensive line, alone, cutting through enemy ships like a scythe through wheat. Its movements were not desperate. They were deliberate. Every strike, every kill, felt like the final strokes of an artist completing his last masterpiece. From the Eclipsera, Aris watched as Oblivion's wrath reached the outer hull of Hellion Bastion, its weapons tearing open the fortress's defenses. Kalen's voice came one final time. "Get them watching." The comm went silent, and the black ship disappeared into the fortress's heart. On every Union channel, every outpost, every ship, every colony, screens flickered to life. The truth was about to be seen, and nothing the Sovereign Union could do would ever stop it. Kalen's final act would change the galaxy forever. The broadcast began with a single line of text, projected onto every screen, every datapad, every comm link across the Sovereign Union. "This is what they buried." Then the images came. Footage of Operation Ashfall, cities on Terra Prime burning under orbital fire, children screaming as evacuation ships were shot down. Classified orders signed by Union warlords, authorizing extermination campaigns disguised as strategic relocations. The faces of counselors behind their mirrored masks, speaking calmly as they decided which colonies would quietly vanish. Every hidden atrocity, every erased truth poured into the open. On the Eclipsera, Aris Vale stood in silence, the data chip still warm in his hand. Around him, his crew watched in stunned horror as the Union's lies were stripped bare. Kalen Drax had done it, but there was no word from Oblivion's wrath. Inside Hellion Bastion, the black warship tore through bulkheads and corridors, a force of unstoppable purpose. Kalen moved through the ship like a ghost, his coat trailing behind him, his steps deliberate. He reached the fortress core, a chamber of humming energy conduits and pulsing reactor veins. The control terminal awaited, glowing with ominous light. Kalen placed the final key into the slot. The archives pulsed, and the signal surged outward like a flood. Every secret the Union had buried was now free. Moments later, the fortress defenses turned inward. Automated turrets, once silent, activated in panic as the Union tried to stop him. Soldiers poured into the core, weapons raised, but Kalen never looked back. He reached for the manual override on the Oblivion's wrath, primed its reactor for overload, and whispered a single word: "Remember." The ship's engines roared for the last time. A flash of light engulfed the core, and then silence. Across the galaxy, chaos erupted. Entire fleets mutinied. Colonies declared independence overnight. High-ranking officers defected or vanished. The Sovereign Union's grip fractured as fear turned inward, because power built on lies cannot survive truth. Weeks later, the Union declared that Kalen Drax had been eliminated. They broadcast his death as propaganda, showing a fabricated execution, just as they once had for Aris Vale after his defection. But it didn't matter. The name Kalen Drax had become more than a man. It was a memory, a symbol, a warning. Aris Vale became a wanderer. He no longer wore a uniform or bore a rank. Instead, he carried a single data chip, the same one he had used to unleash the truth. He traveled from world to world, quietly handing the chip to those who needed to see it most: the young, the broken, the forgotten. He never told them what to do with it. He simply said, "Remember." In time, statues of Kalen appeared on freed worlds, not as a conqueror but as a reminder. His eyes were always cast downward, his hands empty, as if to say that victory always comes at a cost too great to bear. No one ever found his body. Some believed he died with his ship. Others swore they had seen the Oblivion's wrath vanish into uncharted space, waiting for the next empire to grow arrogant enough to erase history. But Aris knew the truth. Kalen Drax was not just a man. He was a memory that refused to die. And as long as memory endured, so would the fight against those who thrived on silence. This time, Aris did not feel fear. He felt something far stronger: hope, because the galaxy had finally remembered.